introduce Doris Florig. She has been working in this area since the 1970s, originally from outside of Philadelphia, spending most of her time in Vermont. Her summers here have been experimenting with natural and synthetic dyes. She started out spinning and weaving, and she'll talk a little bit more about that evolution. She received a degree from the University of Tampa and has been a resident of Teton Science Schools for the past 3 summers and will return next summer. She's exhibited in Silver City, New Mexico, the University of Wyoming, and Dixie State University. So please welcome Doris.
So basically, I'm a tapestry artist. And tapestry, if you don't know what tapestry is, weavers can be two different things. You can weave functional things, or you could weave, what I do is useless things, non-practical things. There's an example of some of my weaving. And basically, when you weave in tapestry, you're making the canvas and the painting at the same time. Okay, so because I'm a tapestry weaver, back in the 70s, I started spinning with the idea that I was going to spin all my own yarn before I started weaving. And actually, I found out that Martha Washington had 16 spinners to keep up with her weaving. So soon I switched and started purchasing commercial yarns. And commercial yarns, I go into a yarn shop and think, I'm just not good with color. And, trying to make these colors go together. And once I started doing natural dyes, I realized that anybody can be good with color, because the colors that come out, have such a broad range. And I do a combination of natural dyes, and eventually I got into synthetic dyes for a while. I spent 4 years in the 70s. I immigrated, my husband and I immigrated up to Canada. We were way up in the wilderness, and fields of flowers. So I started getting into natural dyes. And the nice thing about natural dyes is that it really makes you connect. I think Adam mentioned that, most people come here and they see the mountains, and that's Wyoming. Everywhere I go, I see all the plants. And if I don't know what the plant is, then I start doing research. And you really don't, I don't know what I'm going to come up with if I find a new plant. Just because it has some red in it doesn't mean it's going to be a red dye. And so I go out and I collect. I usually work with a 4-gallon canner pot and cut the plants down, put it in the pot and simmer it. And at the same time that it's simmering, I'm simmering yarn in alum. And alum is the chemical. You almost always, not 100%, but you almost always need a chemical that binds the yarn, the color to the yarn. If not, it'll wash out. So I use alum, and alum is the same thing. It's potassium aluminum sulfate. But if you go into the grocery store and you're in the pickle section, in the spice section, pickles are made with alum. And it's used for making the pickles crisp. And so that's what works. But I never buy it from the grocery store. It's outrageously expensive. I get it from a wholesale supplier. So you just simmer that pot, and then you simmer the yarn and the alum, transfer that. Take out everything out of that pot, and then transfer the fibers into that pot. Sometimes I do it all in one pot, but the problem is then for the next 3 or 4 years, every time I pick up that yarn, I see that, that was natural dyes, because I see the little dried leaves still in the plant. So you kind of have to pick and choose whether you want that in your final product or not. When I'm doing this, I like questions, and also I like doing this because I learn from people like you. So as I'm talking, if you have any kind of thoughts, just bring it up, because that helps me into knowing that you want to hear what you want to hear. Yes?
I just wanted to note the alum is to fix the color, is it not?
It is.
Right. I just thought I'd mention it because
yes,
it's probably so common to you, you didn't realize you hadn't said why alum was in it.
Oh, I thought I said because it helps the color adhere to the yarn.
It actually fixes
but
it.
fixed meaning
And then
maintains
it maintains, and it will bring out the richness in the alum. So think of what they're doing with our pickles.
Yeah, and it does affect the color of the yarn slightly. So anyway, back in this, oops, not that one. Back in the 70s, here's, these were things that I picked and dyed, and I always keep little samples of my work. And it's interesting because these are things that I've done in the past few years, and the color from the 70s is just as good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why in the Middle Ages, the tapestries, they're kind of, you know, when you go into a museum, they're kind of grayed out, but the color is still there. And then the unicorn tapestries that are in, what's the museum in New York?
The cloisters,
The cloisters. Yeah. So at one point, they decided that those tapestries needed to be cleaned. So they took them down and they took the backs off. And when they took the back off, they found out that the colors were really intense. So it's because they have been protected all these years. So it's just like Adam was saying about the photographs. You really need, like tapestries really need to be in a dark place. If you buy a tapestry, you don't want to put it by a window.
Did you ever run into any problem with plant toxins, surprises from boiling or getting
Things that I
reactions?
shouldn't be?
Yeah, things you shouldn't
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. Not so much the plants, but back in the 70s, one chemical that I really liked, okay, so alum's kind of the one you use most of the time. But then if you take out of the alum pot and then you put it in with iron, let's see, here's some examples. This is all, that's rabbit brush, and it's all out of the same thing. I can't really see what it says right now, but this is probably alum, and this one, I took this same fiber, and then I put it in a pot with iron, and the iron makes it dull. Afterward, you can come up and look a little closer. The lighting's not so good, but so anyway, so if you use, back in the 70s, there was chrome.
Yeah.
And chrome was so, I mean, the colors were so rich. And so I just had to quit.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, you don't breathe it. Also tin was another one. The tin will give you really bright colors. So now, especially because I'm the resident artist at the Teton Science School, I have a studio out there, and I'm really careful about, basically I just use alum because I know, you know, people are in and out of there all the time, and I don't want them to breathe any nasty chemicals. The plant itself, I can't think. I can't think of any of them that are toxic as much as some of them really stink.
Yeah.
So I have to be careful when I use that too. Where I want to go, yes?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, does it make a difference, the color, whether you use wool or cotton or what type of fiber of yarn you're using?
Yeah.
And also, when you take the plant and you say you cut them, do you take the roots and do you know which part of the plant the dye comes from?
Yeah.
Or do you just stick the whole thing in there
You know,
and boil it? Or
let me see, what was your first question?
does it make a difference in the color depending on what type of fiber, whether it's cotton
Oh,
or
yeah.
wool or?
Yeah, it does. I mostly work with wool. And every now and then I do something with cotton. But cotton, I don't get the really rich colors with it. It's much more faded.
But will it be the same color? But like, will it be
It's
a
the
red,
same,
but
it
it's maybe?
just doesn't have that body that it has when it's in wool. Yeah.
And then, do you just pull the whole thing in there?
Oh,
The whole plant?
the plant, yeah, that's interesting because mostly I do what's easy, and it's easy to just pull the whole plant and use that. Every now and then, like dandelions, the root is really good. You get a purple from that. But, you know, that you have to spend a lot of time digging the dandelions. And then I dye a pound of yarn at a time, so I really work in bulk. So coming up with enough dandelion roots, I have to really want that color.
So different parts of the plant may dye different colors?
Yes. Yeah, they do. Blossoms don't really give you a whole lot. Tansies, like there's tansies back there. Oh, I only have the one color there. But yeah, and that's really easy, the blossoms on that, to just snap the tops off of that. And then I can do the plant separately. You'll get maybe the same, you'll get yellow, but a different variation in the yellow. Yep. Yeah.
I noticed on your sample with the aspen leaves that it varied from shades of green to brown to black. Would that be due to different parts of the aspen branch, or?
No, the reason that varied so much, this one I can read it actually. Okay, all samples are simmered with alum and cream of tartar. Cream of tartar gives you more of a blend. It kind of smooths things out, which sometimes I don't care about things being so smooth, so I don't put it in. Followed by, okay, that's the first one. That is the alum, right there. Then the next one, I use oxalic acid, number 2. Number 3 is the iron. You can see how it darkened it. Number 4 is baking soda. And number 5 is copper sulfate. So it all went through, everything was the same to start with. Every one of these was that color to start with. And then I put it in different pots. And then, well, the same thing, here's baking soda. This is alum and cream of tartar. This is, and that's interesting too, that's on gray. I only buy, white yarn, gray yarn, brown yarn, only what naturally comes off the sheep. And okay, this one's gray. Yeah, well, when you come up later, you'll see the effect that you get. The gray comes out really nice. Then what's this one? Copper sulfate. Oh, this one went into vinegar afterwards. So the acid kind of lightens it up. This one's, okay, this was on white, and this was on gray. And they both went into vinegar after being in with the alum.
What does the vinegar do?
Pardon?
What does the vinegar do?
It's the acid that, well, here's what it did. There it was before the vinegar, and it went in there with the vinegar.
It opens the pores of the cloth.
That's probably right.
Yes.
Yeah, it opens the pores, yeah. That makes sense.
Have you ever worked with any nightshade plants? Has it ever been any problems with the nightshade plants? Have you ever?
Nightshade, I'm not familiar with.
Southern nightshade is poisonous.
Oh, yeah, I'm not familiar with that at all. Yeah, but now that you mentioned, I'll be watching for it. And the other thing I'm really interested in doing, down in Star Valley, they have Dyer's Woad. And they hate Dyer's Woad. It gets into all the fields, probably in those grassland photos. There's probably some Dyer's Woad growing up there. And the problem is that the cattle won't eat the hay that has any of this Dyer's Woad in it. So next June, I'm going to be down there. I'm going to hold a workshop at the Center for the Arts, and it's going to be on Dyer's Woad. And the reason I'm especially interested in that is because you can't get blue anywhere in this country. Blue comes from indigo. And before indigo existed, Dyer's Woad was what made the Europeans wealthy during the Middle Ages. And they really resisted having indigo show up. So when the Mormons came in the wagon trains out to this area, their dyers brought their Dyer's Woad with them. And it's all over there. And so I want to go down there and make use of that Dyer's Woad. Yeah.
Which brings up a question. Do you grow any of your own plants for some of the more unusual qualities?
Well, when I was doing a lot of gardening, like marigolds and, flowers, I would grow things and specifically for that. And one year I grew flax. And the reason I grew flax was not for the dye, I grew it for the fibers to spin, because from flax you get linen. And that was really interesting, and I brought some flax. I didn't even try dyeing with it because those little violet flowers, they're just so fragile and tiny. I just didn't think I was going to get anything out of it. But when I grew the flax, then, so you pull it because you want the root because that keeps it long. And then I took it, and I was living in Vermont at the time and had a pond. And from there, tied it in bundles, put it in the pond for 3 weeks. And what it does is, within each stalk, there's this gooey substance. And when it's in the pond, it dissolves that. Then you take it out and put it in an attic or store it in a dark place for the winter. And then springtime, you crush that outer stalk. And inside there's like these tiny, tiny little fibers. And then I spun that into yarn. And actually you have to crush this, and I didn't have, there's a little wooden thing that crushes it. And I tried putting it behind my car and backing up, but that didn't work. And then, you know, I built one of these little crusher things, and then it's still, oh, and then you have these spikes. You may see it in an antique store sometime. It looks like these horrible looking nails sticking up out of a piece of wood, and you take it and you go like this, and it pulls out the seeds, separates the seeds from the fibers, and then I spun it, but it was not like commercial linen at all. Mine still had lots of fibers in it, and basically when I weave, I use it for texture. There's no way that you would do it as an alternative because you didn't want to spend the money on linen, even though linen's expensive. I found out that it's very cheap to buy linen, you know, when you think of the process. Yes?
Can your dye be usable for, let's say, watercolors or putting on canvas?
Well, I did that when I knew I was coming here and started this in the spring. Let's see, somewhere around here. I did some, oh, well, there you can see I put in watercolor paper. I've got some back here. This is the wild geranium. So I definitely, yeah, I think I'm going to do that from now on, is just every time I have a dye pot. Here's some other samples. You can just pass those around. It's hard, not much color in those, but anyway, I can pass these around too.
I comment on what you just said. The only problem with using it for watercolor is that it ought to concentrate, which means boiling it down. But of course, we're making a really thick dye. But the whole problem is it is so light sensitive. The way you will paint with it, store it, is in the dark after you're done painting. But you can get UV glass, which will completely block anything that will dull it. It costs a lot to frame, but if you want to paint with natural dyes, which is a wonderful way to go, then in fact you can do that. There has been experimentation with adding things to stabilize, but if you just want the natural colors the way they are, you can actually do that on, just use acid-free like arches or something, and then it'll just be great. Excuse me.
So anyway, in my first 4 years, I did nothing but natural dyes. And then I was living in Canada, and there were just so many fields and flowers everywhere. And then I moved back to the U.S. and moved to Vermont. And Vermont has all these quaint little villages, and everything is very, very pristine. And I thought, I can't go out there and cut down these daisies because there's so many people here are looking at it. And then Dr. Richards had a question for, Richards, is that right? Richter had a question for me today, or this morning when I met her, and she said, well, what about the lichens? And I said, well, you know, back in when I was just about to quit with the natural dyes, I went out and I scraped up a bunch of lichens off a rock, came back into the house, got my dye pots going, opened a book, and it said, lichens take 50 years to grow. And I thought, oh, I can't do that anymore. And then the other thing was my art started shifting towards abstract work. More people were looking at brighter, intensive colors, and you know, it just, the natural dye phase kind of died out a bit. Those colors were no longer as popular. You know, I feel bad I passed around that sample, which is not terribly exciting, but it gives you a general idea of what I'm up to. So I switched and did chemical dyes, and now in the last 10 years, the fact that invasive species are such a problem. So all of a sudden now I'm waking up again, at least now I have a reason to go out there and cut these plants down. Yes?
Do you ever use insects?
Use what?
Like insects to darken colors at all?
Oh, well, insects?
Yeah.
I haven't, the insect, okay, let me have that pink looking one there. I think this is, yep. Okay, this is cochineal. And you don't get pinks and reds from anything in this country. Same with the blues you don't get here, and you don't get the pinks and reds. Cochineal is an insect that lives on the prickly pear cactus. And so when I want red, I buy it, the little jar of cochineal insect. And they live on this cactus. And so it takes thousands of them to get the dye. And the other problem is, with natural dyes, I'm not excited about purchasing. You can purchase natural dye extracts, but to me the excitement of natural dyes is going out and collecting it. So that's when every now and then I go back to my chemical dyes, when I can't go out and collect a particular color that I want. But I hadn't thought about trying other insects. Might be interesting.
Doris, would you like to take one more question?
Pardon?
Would you like to take one more question?
One more question? Okay. Any more questions? And actually, I'll be around, so if you want to come up and talk to me afterwards, I'd be happy to talk to you.
If we kind of wanted to start doing this, or just kind of see how it works, do you have, is there a book or some kind of instruction or something?
Yeah.
You know, the beginning dummies for dyers or something?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to pass this around to everybody. This is what I use for my business card. And actually, I have just started writing kits for kids. And so I write, and this is one of the series. And this is a nice way to get started in natural dyes, because what you do, these are book markers. And this is, I already put this in the alum, and this one is without alum. And so, and this one tells you, take a pot of onion skins and simmer it. And you can do it with alum or without the alum, and it'll hold the dye. And also on here it tells you to use tea bags. And you don't have to do great quantities like I do. You can just start with a small pot of tea, and black tea, and throw some yarn in there. And with tea, it has its own mordant. So you can pass these around.
It has its own what?
Mordant. Mordant. Oh, I didn't even say mordant. I should have. When I keep talking about alum, all of these things, all these additives, it's called a mordant.
Oh,
Okay. Okay. So, oh, and these are in the museum store right now.
So thank you, Doris. Thank you all for attending. Please come up and take a closer look at these panels, and Doris will be in here if you would like to ask some more questions.
And one last thing is the photographers from the Grasslands exhibit, William Sutton and Michael Berman, will be coming here in January.
Yeah, so if you're still in town, some of you might not be, but on January 14th, we will have a mixed media celebration. Those are evening events from 6 to 9 p.m. celebrating the Grasslands exhibit and our partnership with the Nature Conservancy, and both of those photographers will be here that night. So come back in January.
Oh, one more thing. On my card, I have my email address. If you get into natural dyes at all, if you want to know anything, email me, and I'm happy to talk to people. I get excited about other people getting involved in natural dyes.
Thanks, Doris.
Thank you.